The single most amazing thing that I saw at Longpoint this year happened during the cutting final. Turns out that chopping through 3 tatami mats all in a row with a zverkow, not once, not twice, but 3 times, is incredibly impressive. And I think he would have kept going, except that he ran out of mats at that point in time.
Yeah, I think I think that might have been the single biggest highlight, surprisingly, the single biggest highlight of all of the finals.
Because it was unexpected.
It was incredibly unexpected.
It was 2 people during the cutting finals had tied, and so the judges just kind of had to make up a tiebreaker, and so they sat up 3 mats, and they're literally just next to each other, and you have to cut through all 3 of them, and said, all right, try and do a zerkow, and if you do one successfully, keep going until you're not successful. And the one guy couldn't pull it off. He didn't even get one off. Mm-hmm. And then the next guy literally just kept going, and like I said, I think he would have done more than 3 cuts, except that he ran out of mats at that point.
Yeah, and doing a textbook zwerkow against a tatami mat is, I would imagine, it's pretty difficult, because when I do a zwerkow cut, I actually like to cheat a bit. I don't go perfectly horizontal. Of course, that wouldn't work in a tournament setting. It'd be a little bit easier to kind of do his zwerkow at a kind of an angle, which is then really just like a false edge overhowl. It doesn't really count as a zwerkow. But yeah, I mean, that people were cheering after that. It was so impressive.
He deserved cheers for pulling it off.
but the cutting is a really interesting, because of the variety of things that happen in the cutting tournament. You know, they have the basic qualifications, which are to do basic cuts on a single tatami mat. Then they have for the advanced, which is what we saw happening in the finals. Mm-hmm. The advanced cutting, they have to cut moving targets. They have to cut their way through it, which is what is essentially a tatami obstacle course, where they have a couple mats cut up or set up, and you have to cut your way through them as you're moving around. Mm-hmm. And there's certain cuts you have to do as you approach them. We didn't get to see the moving target cutting. That was happening at the same time as the harness fectin, which is why we didn't get to see it. But we did get down and see the obstacle course one. And then, the finals were really impressive. The zwerkow, obviously, again, it stole the show. But there were also some kind of feat of strength as well as accuracy cuts that they did as kind of the final, which was 4 mats set up for a kind of straight vertical cut. And it shows both a little bit of strength behind it, but it really actually comes down to a lot more of being able to show that you can control the blade through multiple mats, because it's very easy for a blade to turn to one side or the other.
Yeah, they were being scored on how straight the cut was, in addition to how far through, how many mats they could penetrate through.
And it was really impressive. I think Jake's cut was certainly by far the most impressive, because he did like almost all 4. And it was a very, very straight cut, except for right close to the very end of the 3rd mat, I guess is what would have been.
No, it was when he started going into the 4th mat.
Okay, so
it started to curve.
It was really impressive, but I think one of the downsides of the way they actually presented the finals was you didn't get to see all the other things that led up to that, because it'd be very easy to watch that and say, well, that's not exactly like the most telling thing for cutting. But just for them to get to that point, they had to go through all these other trials. I think the cutting competition has got to be one of the more brutal ones, because there's so many opportunities for you to fail and not make it to the next bout. And it was really impressive to watch the people who'd gotten to the very end.
And that's the thing, by the time you get to the end, if that very last final was all you saw, those guys made it look easy. But if you watched everyone else struggling the whole rest of the way, you realize that no, cutting these tatami mats were not easy. And it was actually also noted too that there's apparently a tatami mat shortage going on in the world right now.
Yeah, huge shortage happening.
So they were actually using recycled mats, which they straight up admitted made some of the cutting a lot more difficult than it had been in previous years.
So higher difficulty in doing the cutting. But certainly the things that they were setting up, the contests that they were setting up were also very difficult. And I think it spoke to a lot of the skill that people had in doing those cuts, that they were able to do so consistently. Of course, then again, Still nothing more impressive than that workout. The triples workout, because it was like, that could have just kept going and we would have been more impressed each and every time. But it got down to like this little tiny nub, and he still got through it with that third
And
cut.
I feel really bad that I don't remember the guy's name.
Yeah, well, I'll put it right here if I can find it. There'll be like a name right here, up here. But yeah, it was really impressive. He did an incredible job. In fact, I made sure to go find him afterwards and be like, I just want you to know how impressive that was. The other contest that we saw that we'll talk about in throughout multiple tournaments is the rapier fighting, and that of course is with both the rapier and the offhand dagger, the parrying dagger, the main gauche, whatever you want to call it. And I'll be honest, I think that would, if I had to be a tournament judge for any of the competitions, I would not want to do rapier fighting, because it's so fast and it's so hard to see if there's a point scored. I wouldn't want to be responsible having to make those calls. So much pointy steel flying in general directions, and then they're having to call a point. There were a couple in the finals. There were a couple that were very, very clear cut, because you could see the point in, you could see the bend in the blade as it caught, like the throat piece or the mask, and it bent, and you're like, okay, that was an obvious score. But not being a rapier fighter, I will say that I would love to one day get good enough to do that kind of level of competition. But B, just the speed and skill and point control of the people who were in these tournaments was incredibly impressive. And it's also worth noting that Longpoint as a tournament is U.S. based, but the winner was not from the U.S. It was actually Italian, and we actually saw many people from overseas, our brothers in arms in Europe, coming over and participating in all these tournaments.
They said of all of the people attending Longpoint this year came from 12 different countries.
Yeah, and that's really cool, because that's setting Longpoint as a tournament kind of on the next level. Yeah, it's a global scale thing. And so you're seeing these just incredibly good fighters go at it. And so the rapier fighting especially, I don't know how much I have to say other than it was extremely impressive to watch. It was very hard to follow. I imagine it'd be a little bit easier if you're front row, because you're a judge, you're actually able to get unobstructed line of sight. But the bouts were over so quickly. I mean, you compare it to like what we'll talk about in the next video, which is the longsword tournaments. But you compare it to that, and longsword tournaments are short. They're only like 5 to 10 seconds, usually at longest, and that's if people are waiting around pretty long. Rapier fighting, as soon as they start, it was over in like 1 to 2 seconds. Once it was done in earnest, people were actually looking to score that point. So I thought it was a very impressive thing to watch. Incredibly impressive bouts. I would tip my hats to all the people who were in the rapier fighting tournaments, because to become skilled enough to even do basic tournament fighting with rapier, you have to be pretty darn good. So, yeah, next time we will actually talk about longsword. There's kind of two topics with longsword, and so we'll get into that in the next video. So stay tuned for that.